What part of the city are we in today, and where are we at?
The financial district, which is one of the oldest parts of New York City. You know, New York started at the very southern tip, down like by the pier, and then as it grew, it would move upwards. You know, even that's why they call places like the West Village or Greenwich Village or all that. The reason it has the name Village is because in the very beginning, there was a big gap of just open land between what was considered New York City, which would have been down at the very southern tip, and just as far as like the West Village.
Yeah.
So, you know, there was space in between it.
Yeah.
But this place here, this is St. Paul's Chapel, which is kind of an extension of Trinity Church. You know, Trinity Church is right down the street. This is probably my favorite church, not just in New York, but maybe in the world.
Yeah.
Not for necessarily like, you know, the historic reasons or even the architectural reasons, like the design or anything, but just because this was one of the very first places I ever came whenever I got out of prison.
Oh, really?
Yeah, remember we lived right down the street, from this
here,
place.
yeah.
So I used to walk here. You know, I was having a nervous breakdown. I was trying to get used to life out here. And this was one of the places I would come and just sit to be quiet. And that's exactly what they built this place for. Like they called this the Chapel at Ease. So if you didn't, like, remember these streets used to be unpaved, like when there were horses and carts and stuff
All
on
dirt,
them.
yeah.
Exactly.
Cobblestone. Well, not even cobblestone, all dirt.
Yeah. So people who didn't want to trudge through the dirt and walk, you know, a few blocks more to Trinity would stop here. That's why they called it like a chapel at ease. So it was designed for people to rest at, to be like a place of quiet contemplation. And that's exactly what I used to do. I would come here every day just to sit and be in a quiet place where it felt like you were out of the city. And it's existed since they built this in 1766. And even when Trinity Church built down, this place was still here. But this is where George Washington, you know, that's the thing about this part of town, is so much of this place ties into, you know, George Washington and the founding fathers. You know, this is where George Washington, right down the street, is where he did the inauguration, where he puts his hand on the Bible and swears he's going to do his duty as president and all that. As soon as that was done, this is the first place he came. He comes straight down the street after the inauguration and prayed here.
Yeah.
So all of this stuff is tied in really deeply into American history. This is the oldest continually used building in the entirety of Manhattan, and it's the only colonial era building still left standing from in Manhattan.
Really?
Yeah.
I would have thought there would have been more. Wow.
Yeah.
And you were saying earlier about like going into coming in here and having that peace and that solitude and that, you know, coming in here and kind of just meditate and get away from the city and that. And it's so true with, I don't know what it is about cathedrals and churches, but sitting in them.
Yes.
You have that sense of just
almost peace. Yes.
Yeah, right?
And that's like one of the guys that I learned a lot about magic from. Like he said something to me one time that was tied into this stuff. Like one of the reasons that I started doing this, going to these places every day, you know, he was saying if you want to have like beautiful, amazing, fine things in your life, if you want to refine your consciousness, then you have to go to places where those things are. Like you have to like marinate in those environments. You know, you can't like expect to hang out in like bottom of the barrel bars or whatever and like expect any kind of changes that's going to happen to you. So whenever he said that, it was like something clicked into place, and I realized it's like, you know, if I want beautiful, meaningful things in my life, they're not going to come to me. I have to go to where they are. And from that day forward, I started going every single day. I've been into probably every cathedral in New York at some point or another. And the same thing with the museums. You know, you go there and you're just surrounded by all of this art and history and meaning and beauty and all this kind of stuff. That's the two places, museums and cathedrals, where you're like completely immersed in that stuff.
Yeah. And I call that mining it, because I always feel like you're going to these places to dig and to get in the experience and take it in, you know, and to bring it back to your life, your work, your, you know.
You go there, you take it in and absorb it, and then turn it into something else. It's like you get inspired by it, and then you take that inspiration and create something new out of it. That's exactly what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It feeds your soul. These places give you spiritual sustenance.
And feed your soul, rejuvenate you.
Yep, re-energizes you. Yes.
So should we go try to see if we can get inside?
Let's do that.
All right, let's go.
Washington was a Mason. You know, most people don't realize like how big a part the Masonic order played in the creation of the United States. Like if you go to Washington D.C. and you go to the George Washington's the chapter of the Masonic Lodge, or you know, that's dedicated to him, they still have like all of his tools there and stuff.
Oh, that's right. You were saying that the
trowel.
trowel. Yeah.
So like in magic, you know, there's all these tools that are associated with magic, like a wand, a chalice, a pinnacle, all that kind of stuff. It's the same way with the Masons. And one of their tools is a trowel. You know, the thing you use to put the mortar in between bricks. They still have George Washington's Masonic trowel in the museum there. And every time they lay a building, the foundation for any building that's going to be significant to like American history or government or any of that, they still bring out George Washington's trowel to
Lay that first
foundation.
brick, or yeah.
But you'll see a lot of the same like symbolism in these old places that are connected to the Masons in some way, like or even to the members of the Masons. You'll see those same symbols in some of these places. Like anytime you go into a Masonic lodge, one of the things you'll notice is that the floor is all made of like black and white squares.
Oh, really?
And
that's a common...
Yeah, in all of them. And it's because it's symbolic of the black squares represent earth, the white squares represent heaven. So it's like the merging of heaven and earth anytime you see the black and white squares.
That's unbelievable. Yeah. I never knew that. I never knew that.
Yeah, that's where the checkerboard, that's what it means. The checkerboard patterns on all the floors.
That has a whole brand new meaning to me now, and because I use a lot of checkerboard stuff in my own personal work, you know. So it's like,
well, it's also, it comes back again to that the squaring of the circle, the union of the square and the circle thing. The black squares are the squares, the white squares represent the circle. So it's once again merging the square and the circle.
Yeah, square and the circle.
So it says that this plaque was put up due partially to the Sons of the Revolution. The Sons of the Revolution are the same, it's the same group that got together and saved and restored the Francis Tavern, which we're going to go to later. It's one of the places we're going to go to lunch at. You know, it's one of my, again, like, it feels like part of my personal history, like part of what made me who I am, because it was one of the very first places I ever ate when I got out of prison. And it's where George Washington used to meet with his men while they were plotting on overthrowing the government, like launching the revolution against the English. It's where they used to meet to make those plans. Even after they met there, or after the revolution, they met there again for a final time, and George Washington made 13 toasts, and they had 13 drinks, one for each of the 13 original colonies. And that building started, you know, a cannonball went through the roof of it at one time. It was almost destroyed multiple times, and it was due to the Sons of the Revolution, them raising funds, doing all the work on it to save it. They're the same ones who had this plaque put up to commemorate Washington's centennial anniversary. This is good too. It says, this painting of the Great Seal of the United States was commissioned in New York in 1785 and is one of the earliest known depictions. If the bird on the seal resembles a turkey, it may be because the turkey was once considered for the national bird, a choice favored by Benjamin Franklin. Following George Washington's inauguration as the nation's first president in 1789, he attended services at St. Paul's Chapel. The original location of Washington's presidential pew was below the painting of the Great Seal. So where we're standing at right now, this is where George Washington used to sit whenever he came to church here. He would be sitting right below this. And it does kind of look like a turkey. All chapel. And you know, for some of the places we've seen too, like, you don't see that much artwork in here. Like, the architecture is not grand and amazing, and the ceilings aren't painted or any of that kind of stuff. So it's like a relatively plain place, but it's played a huge role in American history to be such a small and like kind of bland place.
we approach it now?
We are coming up to the Francis Tavern, another place connected to George Washington and the Founding Fathers in the very earliest days of New York City.
So we're at the Francis Tavern right now. And what year was this now?
I believe it's 1719. I'm not 100% positive on that because there's been a lot of construction done over time, but they have a plaque that has some of the dates listed that they did things, and I think 1719 is the date it was actually built for the first time. Yeah, before any repairs or anything like that. Yeah. You can see George Washington on the side, because this is another place that was really heavily connected and associated with him.
Yeah.
This was the place we were talking about a while ago where they met before the Revolution to plot overthrowing the British and taking over the country. This is where, after the Revolution, they said they met for the last time. Like George Washington met with his men for the last time here, and they gave 13 toasts and had 13 drinks, one for each of the original 13 colonies. And one of the things, if you look up anything about haunted locations in New York, this is always one of the very first places.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Really?
People that work here always say they hear walking on the footsteps, or they'll say upstairs you'll hear glasses clinking, and it sounds like there's a party going on or something.
Yeah.
So it's the opposite of all those haunted locations you hear about where something tragic or horrible happened, and that stuff's replaying over and over. People here say it feels good.
Mm-hmm,
The people love being here.
Here,
Washington
yeah,
loved
yeah.
being here. And even in, if they've died and passed on or whatever, it's not saying necessarily that they're like George Washington
trapped.
hanging out
Oh,
in
yeah,
this
yeah.
place. It's more like the events that happened here would have been so emotional that they would have left kind of an imprint on the energy of the place, so that it replays itself over and over
and over again.
Yeah, so that tells you they really loved it. This was a place that was greatly loved and still is.
Well, the outside looks like a beautiful building, so I assume it's probably got to be as beautiful inside. So I wouldn't, I'm sure those spirits don't mind being in here.
I wouldn't. I've always, I have always loved this building so much. I can't even describe it. It's one of the very first places I ever ate when I got out of prison. And when I would think of New York at home, if somebody asked me at one point, if you could live anywhere in New York, where would you want to live? I would have said this neighborhood.
Yeah.
Part of it would have been just to be close to
that would have surprised me if I knew that about
Where would you think?
I don't know. For some reason I would think the Village or the East Village or West Village even. I mean, not the East, the West Village. I don't know why. I think just because of the when you moved here, it didn't seem like it's as busy as it is now. Or even within the last probably 5 years or whatever. Something.
Well, even that though, people say a lot of people say they don't like the financial district because everything closes down so early.
Yeah.
But I'm in bed by 9 o'clock.
You're in bed by the time everything's closing.
Yeah.
You're already home at 8 or something.
And it all opens up super early because this is where everybody comes
the
to
business
work.
comake the money.
So it was my hours here.
Yeah.
Up at the crack of dawn, bed at dusk. Yeah.
Well, it's freezing out, so should we go inside and
Let's
grab some food?
Yes.
All right. I'm excited. I've never been in here.
Have you ever seen the statue of him at the Smithsonian? He's not wearing a shirt and he's cut all muscular, and he's sitting in the exact same pose as Baphomet.
As above, so below.
Yeah. He considers it his sacred duty to have a likeness of Washington in his house, just as we have images of God's saints. So people treated George Washington, they looked at George Washington as pretty much the same way that religious people saw saints. This was, saints are always looked at as someone who was, you could say closer to God than the average person in some way, or just exhibited some sort of divine qualities that set them apart from everybody else. And that's the same way people always looked at George Washington. I mean, you can see they even, not only did they have the Baphomet statue of him at the Smithsonian, but even in these, you see him surrounded by angels and sacred figures. It says 54 Pearl Street, which is the address here of the Francis Tavern, was built in 1719, anchors the block, and was designated a New York City landmark in 1966, and listed individually on the National Register of Historic Places in 2008. But we're looking at a little model of what this area would have looked like when it was first built. And there's the Francis Tavern right on the corner. The brick's label reads, Original Holland Brick of Francis Tavern, southeast corner of Pearl and Bond Streets, New York City, built in the year 1778, remodeled 1906. So the brick and nails both, it says, are from the 18th century. Just think these nails, these weren't like mass-produced things the way when we think of nails now, you know, they're just like poured metal or whatever. These things were all made individually by hand by a blacksmith. Written by George Washington. August 30th, 1789. So we are actually in the long room at the Francis Tavern where George Washington gave his final farewell address to the leaders of the troops that had fought with him in the Revolutionary War. And this is the room where people that work here have always said that they hear things at night. Like after it's all closed down, they say it'll still sound like there's a celebration or a dinner or something.
That's
going on
amazing.
here. And the table's still set.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And you're standing in this room where that stuff happened. Where George Washington was in this room. This is where he used to hang out at.
And this is the place where he congratulated everybody for their efforts.
Exactly, yeah. 13 toasts that they gave. Support what courage has gained.
May justice support what courage has gained.
Mm-hmm. May America be an asylum to the persecuted of the earth. May a close union of the states guard the temple they have erected to liberty. And may the remembrance of this day be a lesson to princes. So it says this was part of the treasury for a short period of time. So this was, part of the United States government. This was a government building. Like they really paid attention to what they were doing. Even writing was considered like an art form. All of this, I guess, this is a new exhibit they've got up about George Washington through pop culture. So you see all this stuff like Mad Magazine, Superman comics, the Saturday Evening Post. These are all things to do with pop culture where George Washington makes an appearance at some place or another. There's George Washington, the Fantastic Four, Captain America, the colonial Captain America.
I mean, even before there were comics, it was almost like he was America's first superhero, too.
Yep, exactly, yeah. It makes you realize in a lot of ways George Washington really was like America's first saint. Maybe he wasn't canonized by the Catholic Church, but you can have saints that aren't necessarily Catholic. He was a Mason. You even see him in this little episode, this cartoon here, you see him laying the foundation stone of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. You know, all of those things. If you ever get a chance to go there, to go to Washington D.C. and go to like all the stuff connected to George Washington there, it will blow your mind, like how much Masonic influence there was in all this stuff. Like whenever they laid the foundation stone for the Capitol, it was this whole huge Masonic ritual. Like they had paintings in there of all of them, like George Washington and everybody that's with him. They're all standing there in like full Masonic regalia while they're laying the foundation stones. And all of that stuff had meaning. You know, it wasn't like they just threw it up. You know, whenever they're doing things like even the Pentagon, you know, this five-sided building, like why would they build something like that? You don't see buildings, five-sided buildings like anywhere else really. It's a very, very unique kind of architecture, and it was because of the pentagram having 5 points and how that's a symbol, once again, for Earth, the microcosm, all of that sort of stuff. So all of that stuff held meaning. Everything they did for a purpose and a reason. They weren't just randomly doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Sorry. So we're actually on Stone Street right now, and this is another one of my favorites.
from what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, this is another one of my favorite streets in the entire city, just because it's one of the very first streets. One of the first streets they ever built whenever they started landing here, and you can tell that because you notice the stones on the pavement. You know, history, especially in New York history, you know, it's one of those things that gets all tangled up with legend and myth and, you know, all these crazy stories. So a lot of times it's hard to even tell what's true and what's not. It's like that guy Henry Ford, I think it was, said history is the bunk commonly believed. Means whatever people agree was the history is what the history was.
Becomes or is. Yeah.
So a lot of those things you just never can tell. But what I was always told is that whenever the cargo ships were coming over here, pre-Revolutionary War, whenever they were bringing cargo over, a lot of times if the ships were unbalanced, they would stack these bricks, these stones up in the ships to balance it out. And then after they dropped the cargo off, they didn't need the bricks anymore, so they would just throw these out. The people who were staying here would gather them up, and that's what they would use to build the streets.
That's wild.
In this part of town,
it makes total sense, though.
Yeah, and this part of town, it ties into, you know, that movie I always talk about, Gangs of New York. It's one of my absolute favorite movies, like top 5 favorite movies of all time. But everything in that movie takes place down here in this neighborhood, from like right here next to the water where we were at the other day, all the way up to Chinatown. Like this was where Gangs of New York was happening. One of the things I always think about, like at the very end of that movie, there's a scene that always makes you kind of tear up a little bit. Like Leonardo DiCaprio is standing off in the distance looking over at Manhattan.
Yeah.
And they're kind of doing that time-lapse thing, showing how things change. And he says something, like, I'll mangle it, but he says something along the lines of, like, after that, the city started to change so fast that quickly it seemed like they had erased all traces of our existence, as if we were never even there.
Yeah.
And I always feel, you know, like if you live here, like I was here 10 years, you've been here, what, 24 years now? Like when you're here that long, you see this city is, like, it never stops. It is always
progressing,
continually in a process of change.
Of growth and change. And yeah.
That's part of what New York is. New York is change. But it still makes you sad whenever you see the old stuff disappearing.
Yeah.
You know, the stuff that we think of as New York. And it just, like in that movie, it goes to show us, like, that's how people have always felt. I was talking to somebody one time that was saying, everybody who lives in New York always feels like they just missed the perfect time. Like if you ask people who were here, like when we first were here, like 10 or even 20 years ago, like what's the best time in New York? They would have said like the 70s and the 80s.
The 80s, yeah,
stuff was
exactly.
Raw and gritty.
Yeah.
But if you ask somebody back
and dangerous as hell.
Yes. But if you ask somebody back then, they're like, oh, the best time would have been like the 40s and 50s, you know, after the Great Depression, you know, like during the jazz age, the golden age, and all that stuff when things were coming back to life. But if you ask somebody then, they're like, the 20s. The 20s is when you would have wanted to be. Everybody always feels like they just missed the cut.
Yeah. That's so true.
We're at Columbus Circle right now. They have these Christmas villages all over the city, but this is probably the biggest one at 59th Street, right around the area they call Columbus Circle. And the reason they call it Columbus Circle is because you see the statue across the street. It is Columbus. It's kind of amazing that it's still up, just because I remember a few years ago, like right before we left New York, there was a big push, you know, whenever they were trying to get all the old monuments and stuff taken down. I remember a lot of people were wanting this gone, wanting Columbus gone, maybe even rename the square or the circle.
Yeah, you would kind of have to, right?
Yeah. If somebody were to tell me to paint or draw or try to portray, like when you think of Christmas, what do you think of? What image do you see in your head? This is pretty much what I would see. This is what I would paint.
That's beautiful.
Like the trees of Central Park, the gray sky, the Christmas village.
Yeah, it's like a warm embrace.
You know, this was one of the first places that I really got to see whenever I got out of prison. I was in like a deep state of shock and trauma, so I can't remember much of anything about like the whole first 2 years that I was out. I only have like little bits and pieces of memories, but one of those memories is coming here and just how amazed I was at it. Like, you know, I've been in prison for 20 years, hadn't seen anything, and then even before that, like in Arkansas, like there's nothing like this there. So I came here and I was just like completely amazed and blown away by it, and it became like a tradition for me. Like I started coming here every single year. This was like part of Christmas to me. This was how you knew.
Yeah, right.
The Christmas season was coming out here, smelling the hot chocolate, smelling the cedar, you know, the tree stuff that's everywhere.
Everything. Yeah.
I mean, after you get used to it, you come back year after year, and you know, it wears. Some of the newness wears off of it, and it's kind of the same thing every year, but still, it's like this is part of.
Yeah, it kind of kicks off the whole season, you know, and I'm sure kicks off the whole winter too. You know, that whole kind of.
And I still like. We always try to get as many of our Christmas presents as possible here, just because there's so many things that are made in New York, and you're not going to find
anywhere else. Yeah.
They have like the energy of the city to the stuff they're selling.
Within the roots of it,
It's not like stuff you can find at Walmart.
Yeah.
Walking through Central Park, where this was like my work route for at least a year. Whenever I was doing tours at the Met, every single day had to walk through.
Coming through this way.
Yep. Which, if you got to walk to work, this is not a bad.
That's not a bad route to be going. No.
Nope.
Not at all.
This is one of the few places in Manhattan that you can feel like any connection with nature at all. You know, a lot of times you don't think about stuff, but I remember like when we were getting ready to leave here at one point, I wanted to take some rocks with me, like some stones from New York.
Yeah.
And I started going around the streets like just looking for rocks. You don't realize there are no rocks.
There are no rocks to be had.
No.
Find cigarette butts and some gum.
Yep.
But no rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah. This is one of the few places where, you know, you're going to be in the midst of like more than one scraggly tree.
Yeah. So it's the only place too that well, like you were saying earlier, it's the only place you can come that you feel like you're in nature. You know,
exactly.
around here.
But even then, it's not like wild nature. I mean, like this place is landscaped. You know, constantly. Every day of the year, they're probably
working on it.
Exactly. Like this is all laid out by plan. Like nothing out here just grew up the way you see it.
Yeah.
Here are these ladders. They always put these ladders out so that when the water freezes over, somebody's almost always going to fall in. Yeah, and they put these ladders so that you can stretch it out and pull them in.
That's wild.
Yeah. They put them out every winter, and then they take them in the spring.
I've never seen them before.
Yeah. People will try to walk on the ice once it freezes over. and it'll crack and they'll fall through. Now we are at Trinity Church, which is, I mean, St. Paul's was like an offshoot of this. It was like a chapel of this building. This is considered the main body of the church. You can see the cemetery. It's probably one of, if not the oldest cemetery in Manhattan. Nobody can be buried here anymore. There's no more room. But you can still come through here and look at it. It's nice just being here. Kind of reminds me of Salem, don't you?
Definitely. Especially the stones, the shape of the stones and everything.
Yeah. You know, you're in this really super modern part of the city, and then you come to these little pockets like this, these little oases where it's still like the 1700s.
Yeah. It always makes me think about when I come and see the churches and that, it always makes me think about what it looked like when these were built, because there was, I'm sure, vast opening of spaces and stuff, you know?
Exactly. I mean, look at that view. This is just incredible, just the architecture of it, the dark stone. It's like being somewhere else. This is the spot where George Washington actually was inaugurated as the very first president of the United States. This is where he stood, put his hand on the Bible, took the oath that he was going to serve the country to the best of his ability. All of that happened right here. So that's why they have the statue of him here. There's so much in this area that ties into George Washington and the Revolutionary War and all of that stuff, the founding fathers. You know, this is like ground zero where all of that stuff took place. It's kind of amazing just knowing whenever you stand here, you're standing in the place where they stood. When all of these things of historic consequence took place, we're right there where it's happening. I actually met Kevin like within days of getting out of prison. Like when I talk about my oldest friends, like I've only been out for 11 years, but I met Kevin is my absolute oldest friend. I met him 3 days after I got out of prison?
Yeah, it's pretty much right after you got out of prison. You were over at Peter's place and stopped into my old shop.
And it was one of the weirdest things was, without even knowing this at all, they had tattooed Jesse Miskelly like before I had come in there. So just the oddness, you know, the synchronicity of going into the same place that he had been in. Yeah. So when we met, Kevin was working at Sacred on the corner of Broadway and Canal. Mm-hmm. How long did you work there for?
I was at that shop for almost 20 years.
20 years. Yeah. That seemed like your shop. You were there so long.
I mean, I put so much into that place. It was like my own baby. You know, Wes owns the place, obviously, but he pretty much let us have full range of the shop and be able to control everything we wanted to do.
Yeah. Kevin was my introduction to life outside of prison again. He was the reason I started like coming out of shock and trauma and actually exploring the world, coming alive.
Put you on social media.
Yep. I had no idea anything about Twitter, Instagram, or any of that kind of stuff. He was the one who introduced me to all of that.
first gallery shows.
Oh, yeah, your first gallery show. I forgot about
the
that.
The very first gallery show I ever did was with artwork that I had created while I was still in prison. And Kevin put together that first show. And then years later, I would do a second one at that same gallery. So 2 at Sacred.
Pretty much both of them almost sold out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the first one did sell out. The second one was almost sold out.
So how long have you been at this place for? We are at Inked, if you can't tell by the coffee mug.
Yeah, so I've been at Inked, which is the brainchild of Inked magazine. I've been here since right when the pandemic started. So pandemic started in, March of 2020. I joined here in about June. There was a couple months of downtime, so obviously there was really nothing you could do. So I was just focusing on journalism stuff during that time.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. He also shoots stuff for the New York Police Department, for the New York Fire Department, as well as just random news sources that might need footage of stuff that he catches. He's doing all that in addition to here.
Any breaking scene, fire, shooting, stabbings.
How in the hell did you get into the tattoo world in the first place? I've never asked you that.
Oh, man, this was back in 96, 97. I started making body jewelry for a guy, and then I would actually come from Baltimore to New York on a regular basis to sell jewelry, which then turned in years later that I actually worked for the guy who I was selling jewelry for, or selling jewelry to. And then I started managing his shop, but while I was in Maryland, I started piercing, tried tattooing, realized it was not my thing at all.
Yeah.
And then
you got me doing that for a short period of time too, and I realized it wasn't my thing either.
Not a good idea.
Yeah.
It's still there. Yeah, so I've been at this location for about 3 years now, I guess.
And is this the biggest tattoo shop in Manhattan?
Probably so. I feel like after this past year, we took another floor in the building, so I think we're up to almost 15,000 square feet.
Wow.
So for New York City standards, this is a massive shop.
Monstrous.
Yeah.
So you're going to show us around?
Yeah, I'll give you guys the nickel tour.
Very good.
Yeah. So obviously it's right after the holidays, so it's a pretty slow day.
Yeah.
On this floor we have 14 stations. Justin's one of our resident artists.
Good to meet you.
Got Nini over there. Ralphie's floating around here somewhere.
So how many artists are working here total right now?
So right now, we can comfortably fit 30 artists in this shop between the floors.
Very nice.
And then if need be, we're going to be doing another event in April where I'm actually going to have a lot of people come in. We'll actually probably put more tattoo stations along the side for that day. But we're doing monthly gallery exhibits again. This is set up a little bit differently than Sacred was, where we had our own private room just for the gallery. This one's a little bit more communal, so during the events we take the stanchion ropes and we block things off so if people want to tattoo, they can still tattoo, or we can open them up, have free space for everybody to wander around.
And is this all one artist?
So this is all one artist right here. This is John Westbay. He's a New York-based artist. I think he was just in Basel a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
That's
becoming a huge art scene. That's
non-stop,
taking over the art world.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it seems like if you're not showing at Basel, you just might as well not show.
Yep.
Inked Magazine operates out of this location as well. They have their office. Since it's a holiday, they're actually off for the next couple days. They'll be back in the office starting next month.
I recognize Roman Reigns. Oh, that is Post Malone. I was going to ask, is it?
Yeah, Post Malone was on one of the covers. Ryan Ashley's been featured a bunch of times. A bunch of different people. I think this latest issue we have Mike Tyson on the cover.
Okay.
So they flew out to California, they shot with him, then he went to Miami and shot with him down there.
All right.
So they did this cool cover shot where he's holding boxing gloves that look like they've been glued, laced with roses, which is kind of cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
When does that come out?
It should be on shelves now.
Okay.
Ralphie's one of our resident artists here.
How you doing?
Ralphie does a lot of pop art type stuff. An area where everybody can kind of come draw.
I always like to look at the stencils.
Here. This is where all the YouTube channel stuff happens for what we do. I think there's 3 million plus subscribers.
On YouTube?
Yeah. And then the Instagram page, I think, has over 3 million as well. TikTok has almost 2 million or a little over that at this point.
Very nice.
Yeah.
TikTok is the one thing I can't bring myself to.
I'm a 40-year-old plus man, and I don't understand TikTok.
Nope.
I can't figure it out. We've learned that like every artist has a very particular way that they want to photograph their tattoos. So
So they bring them down
we
here.
literally have like every type of backdrop for our
Right.
artists. So it's like if you want bushes in your background, you got bushes.
Yeah.
You want bamboo or that or whatever, I got it.
Oh, we did a circle.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we'll go up through this way and I'll show you the other floor.
All right. Is it the upstairs?
Yeah, the second floor that we got.
They didn't have that last time I was here, right? It was just the
No.
bottom floor in this one.
Yeah, we took this space in May.
Didn't plan on doing an interview when you woke up this morning, did you?
Yeah, make me look thin. All about that editing magic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we took this floor back in May. It's like the lounge area for when people come in. Definitely a lot warmer
Who's
up
that
here.
artist, do you know?
This is Jazzy Camacho.
Okay.
She does a lot of calligraphy work.
Yeah. Kind of reminds me of like Retina.
Yeah, totally.
Stuff,
Yeah, pretty much along that retina style.
You too. Yes, it has.
I think Caroline's got to go to lunch soon, right? Are you able to hang down there for a little bit? Yeah, so upstairs it's pretty much like a cut and paste of everything else.
This is amazing.
Artist drawing area.
This is a whole world unto itself.
Oh,
in
yeah.
here.
Yeah, so up here we have 16 stations.
So 16 up here, 14 downstairs?
Yeah.
What's your view? So when I first got out, Kevin was one of my main babysitters, and I went to work with him pretty much every single day for a long time. I would show up when the shop opened in the morning, stay till they closed at night, and a lot of times we'd go get dinner or something afterwards. But he was one of the people that I had with me pretty much 24/7 because I couldn't take care of myself or, even figure out how to live in the world again for a long time.
You did quite well.
It wouldn't have happened the way it did without you in the beginning, though.
I mean, you figured it out pretty quick, though. I just
Your
gave you a
mouth
little,
to God's ear.
little push.
Yeah.
Right.
So, where are we at?
We're at Grand Central Station, and probably the most famous train station in the United States, I would say, right?
Absolutely, and one of, if not the most famous train station in the world, too.
Yeah.
We're standing in front of the clock. You can see it right behind us. One of the things about this is, and this is kind of strange because this is exactly what you said to me this morning. Like, they say this is the origin of the phrase in New York, meet me at the clock.
Oh yeah, yeah.
If somebody
yeah.
says meet me at the clock, this is where they're talking about meeting. And when we were talking about meeting this morning, I get a text from Dave saying, I'll meet you at the clock.
Which is because I knew right away you would know exactly where that was.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's a myth about this. This is one of those places in New York that there's all kinds of strange stories and stuff connected to. Some of it's true, some of it's not. This clock is one of the ones that's not. Like, you'll hear all these sources saying this clock is worth $20 million.
Oh my God!
They call it the jewel.
It's a solid gold.
Well, they said that was one of the things. They would say that it was the glass on it was made of opal.
Okay.
And it's not. All of that came from like misreporting in the media, and
Yeah.
somebody said it. A bunch of other media sources picked it up and ran with it. Now they say this clock is worth $20 million. It is not. It's just plain glass.
What to say. Yeah. I mean, I can kind of see like where it has that fogginess that maybe that's why people thought on the glass itself was considered opal or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that would have to be solid gold and solid opal.
Exactly.
Worth that much.
Yeah. And it was made by a famous watch company. I can't remember what their name was, but they made like self-winding watches and clocks and stuff like this. So you were supposed to never have to wind this or set it or anything. It was supposed to always be, you know, perfect, flawless.
Which on this point, it probably runs electric or something.
Something, yeah.
Or maybe somebody comes in every morning and
Winds it back up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it probably is electric or something now. Everything changes. Another thing is the ceiling, which you can't see yet, but you will in a minute. It is covered in constellations.
Yes.
I mean, one of the reasons we were wanting to come here is because we were already at the churches, you know, down in the financial district, and all of these things kind of tie in together in a way because they're temples. You know, when people think of Grand Central Station, they don't think of a temple.
Yeah.
We think of temples as being places that are, you know, just for religious purposes or like worship purposes or whatever like that. And we think of that because that's what most churches are now, but that was not true in the ancient world. You know, like in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, all of the buildings that were dedicated to the gods also served other purposes and functions. Like, you know, the temple to Athena was also the treasury. It was what, you know, basically like their IRS back in those days.
Yeah.
And it's the same way with Grand Central Station. You know, you've got the constellations in here, but if you go outside, you see that this is literally a temple to Mercury, the god of not only magic, but also of, what's the word? Like traveling and, you know, making transitions from one place to the other, so it makes complete sense that this is
and that's the one that's right in the it's on, I think, on this side, and it's right on the top of the building, right?
Yes.
Yeah, right in the middle.
Do you have a permit
Yeah.
for this?
We do not.
You
No.
do not? Oh, you can't do that.
Okay. Okay. I thought it was a public space, so
Okay.
You have to have a permit to do it.
okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Right? Thank you.
So we're standing in front of the Grand Central Terminal now after getting booted out.
Yeah.
So you can see from here the statue of the god Mercury or Hermes on the top, and this doesn't, I mean, you get no idea of the scale of how massive this thing is from standing down here looking up. You know, if you look at the old photos of when they were first carving this, and you can see the workers up there by the statue, you can see that this thing is massive. You know, there's that one of the guy laying almost like
in his
palm of
hand,
his hand, like
yeah.
completely stretched out. So this thing is several stories tall, and you don't really get that from down here. It doesn't look as impressive, but the thing we were talking about before they told us to get out or stop filming was how people in the old days, or people now, think about temples as being only houses of worship, like used for nothing else, and how that wasn't always true. That's a relatively modern idea. Like in ancient Greece and ancient Rome, these buildings that were dedicated to the gods also served other purposes. Like Athena's temple was also the treasury, like their equivalent of the IRS. So Hermes, or Mercury, is the god of not only magic, but also travel. So it makes complete sense that
That it's going to be there, yeah.
Exactly, and commerce. He's the god of buying and selling. And when you walk in here, you know now it's almost like a shopping mall inside now with all the restaurants and stores and everything. So it makes sense that this would be his temple. But people
absolutely.
People don't think of this as a temple.
Yeah.
That's exactly what
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah, well, they're, you know, eyes down. And
Yep. Get to where
on
I'm
the
going.
move and get to where I'm going. Exactly, yeah. And the gotta be one of the most beautiful statues in the city, I
It's
think.
one of my absolute favorite pieces of New York City, especially the old. When you look up the old photos, when you look at those, it's like when you're looking at them, you can feel what New York used to feel like before it started changing.
Yeah.
And then even here, standing at the spot, you probably can't see it yet. We'll show it to you before we go, but you're looking also directly at the Chrysler building, which is I've always thought this was
my favorite building.
Me too.
Yeah, that's
Me
my
too.
favorite building.
Everybody talks about the Empire State Building,
No.
but to me, this is 10 times more beautiful than the Empire
They got
State
the
Building.
gargoyles coming up the
Yes.
side of it and everything.
Yes.
That's
This is
always
like
been my favorite.
Classic New York.
At its finest.
Yes.
All right, so we're standing in front of the famous Chelsea Hotel.
On 23rd Street. Yep. And I'm looking right now at a list. You know, this place is famous for a ton of different reasons. And pretty much anybody who's anybody in like the literary scene, the music scene in New York, all stayed in this. I'm looking at a list right now. It said it's where Arthur C. Clarke wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey. Allen Ginsberg, Tennessee Williams, Thomas Wolfe, Tom Waits, Rufus Wainwright, all lived within these walls. Bob Dylan lived here. The poet Dylan Thomas lived here. You know, he's kind of famous for, he used to drink all the time at the White Horse Tavern.
Mm-hmm.
The night he died, he announced he had beaten his record and drank 18 straight whiskeys. And as soon as he said that, he fell over unconscious on the floor. They pick him up and bring him here. He pretty much died on the floor of this place, but they didn't pronounce him dead until they moved him to, I think it was St. Anthony's Hospital.
Mm-hmm.
That was where they pronounced him dead. It's really, really hard to get into this place now. I actually got to go in it You've been in it before, haven't you?
I spent the night here. April took me one time for my birthday. We spent the night here. Yeah.
Did you like it?
Yeah. I mean, it was cool. I
What
mean,
did you like about it?
I mean, just the history of it. You know what I mean? Like, this is also where Sid and Nancy.
Exactly.
You know, that story happened.
Yeah,
you know,
that's the most famous
Sid Vicious.
thing,
Yeah.
probably.
But it was amazing to be in there, and a lot of these places up here, even still to this day. I mean, a lot less now, but a lot of these are people's permanent homes that are in here as well.
Yeah.
So when you get inside and you actually get to go upstairs in the different places, you see the artwork just filling the halls everywhere.
Yeah.
And then even people's doors to their apartments are all filled with art. And, you know, when they have bottle caps glued all over them or something like that.
I haven't seen it since they renovated it. When I was in it, I was in the room right next to the bottom of the sign.
Yeah,
where
you
it
were
says
right
Chelsea,
there. Yeah, I
and that
remember seeing a
window.
photo from it. Yeah.
But it's one of those places that always felt kind of, you know, you hear about like haunted places or whatever, or things like that.
Yeah.
And you go in and you're like, okay, well, I don't know, maybe not, whatever.
Yeah.
This was one of those places that
You could feel the footsteps.
I felt bad in there.
Yeah. It did. It had that feeling when we were in the room that we were in, where I was gonna like look under the bed and maybe find something up there or something, you know, unpleasant.
To me, stuff like that, the only way I know how to describe it, like the closest I can come to articulating it, is it feels empty. You know, they say basically what the world of the dead eats is life. You know, that's why we make these offerings to it, everything from like burning those ghost dollars at the Chinese New Year to like your ancestors, or, you know, lighting incense or candles for them or whatever. You're basically feeding them energy.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of makes sense that it feels empty because it's like there's no energy there. This place to me felt like an energetic vacuum that wanted to be fed in some way.
Yeah, that's very, very true.
Yeah.
You know, like the way you put that, it's so true. It felt like it was hungry, you know.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
So all these plaques talk about various people who've lived here. First off, it says this is on the National Register of Historic Places, and it was this place was built in, I think it was 1884. So what's that? 865, 75. So about 20 years after the Civil War would have been when this place was built. Here it says Arthur Miller, the noted author and playwright. He wrote Death of a Salesman, The Crucible, A View from the Bridge, among other works. Lived here from 1962 to 1968, during which time he wrote After the Fall, Incident at, Vicky, and The Price, all written here. There's another one that says dedicated to the memory of Dylan Thomas, who lived and labored last here at the Chelsea Hotel, and from here sailed out to die. So this was, you know, the very last place that Dylan Thomas ever lived. The great American writer Thomas Wolfe lived here from 1900 to 1938. He was the author of Look Homeward Angel, Of Time in the River, The Web in the Rock, You Can't Go Home Again, The Hills Behind. He lived at the Chelsea Hotel during the last years of his life. You know, this is one of those places that really is like part of the fabric of the soul of New York City. You know, when I think of New York, this is one of the places I think of. It's like if this place ever disappears, if it's ever torn down or something, it would be like a huge chunk of the heart and soul of New York was gone forever. There's actually a bar.
What's that?
Find out there's actually a bar.
I thought there was.
Do you know by any chance, is there a bar in the hotel?
Yeah, I thought there was.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
at the bar for a few minutes?
Yeah, sure. Wow. Yeah, this is beautiful.
Excellent. How are you? Is it okay if we sit at the bar? Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, so this was definitely not here the last time.
No, not when I was here.
Yeah.
I've never been in here.
Yeah. I don't even think that the elevator was working the time that I was here before. I had to take the stairs.
No, when I came in, it was a time period here when you're doing a lot of battles with the people who lived here. Like they were trying to get them out of here.
Trying to do like buyouts or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the guy that I knew that was here, like, would not budge. So when I was in here, there was almost no one in this entire building. And everywhere you went, it was just like sheets of plastic hanging out. Sheetrock was off the walls. You could see the studs in there.
And the wiring and everything. Yeah. Yeah, because that was probably right before they did the major construction, right? Or during. During.
This is the first time I have ridden the train since we've been back this trip, and I do not miss this at all.
So do you remember the first time that you've ever ridden a train? When you came? Like
Not the very first time, just because I was in so much shock and trauma, but I do remember like loving it in the beginning. You know, like there's nothing like this anywhere in the world. Even if you go to other countries and ride their subway system, it's not like New York.
Yeah, most of them are really clean too.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Not to say that New York subway systems aren't clean,
They're not clean.
but compared to like if you go to Boston or even if you're in London, you ride the tube. At least with there, like they have like fabric on their seats and shit. You'd never get away with that here.
Oh no.
There'd be a mess.
Yeah. I used to love this, like when I first got out, because I'd never seen anything like it before. And then I went to hating it in a very short period of time, especially during rush hour. And it's always either too hot or too cold or something, slightly annoying.
Too many people eating food.
Yep, the smell.
Yeah, nowhere to sit, crazy people. You got to get out and go to the next car.
So I went from loving it to hating it. And then I started traveling by myself finally. And one of the ways I did that was just by getting on the train at any given time and going just to a random place and getting off and trying to find my way home.
Yeah.
So that was how I started learning the city. So I went to loving it then because it was something new again by myself. And then once you get used to it, you start to hate it.
They get all over. Yeah. It is one of those things though. You really don't have a full New York experience unless you ride the train. Even if you're coming here to visit, you know what I mean?
Yep.
You got to try it. Yep. It can be scary, but
Brooklyn Bound in train station. 8th Street next day.
Sit down.
That's our stop. Yeah.
Yeah, this is part of the experience of everyday life here.
Yeah.
You spend so much of your time on these trains if you live in New York that it's almost like your second apartment.
Yeah. And it also makes sense too because to drive here it would take you 3 times the time, especially
and the
during
cost
rush hour or something like that. The cost
of having a car. you know, rent, like you rent a parking space here.
Yeah.
It costs as much as rent in you know, any other city.
Yeah, and tickets here, if you don't move your car at a certain time, depending on where it is, forget about that, you know. Yeah.
Ladies and passengers not safe to walk or stand on the yellow strip after you have exited the train. Please stand clear of the yellow strip. Also, transmit the department walkways remind you that backpacks and large containers are subject to management.
That's the other thing. You can never understand one fucking word that
Nope.
they say.
One of my favorite things, there was one guy, one driver, one train conductor that I remember every year on Halloween, he would always say, "This is the R train."
Yeah. Every once in a while, you get those super happy people and just like real positive people. The next stop, you know, they're having fun with their jobs.
So this is 8th Street.
Yep, this is us right here. Yeah. So we're headed now to Washington Square Park, which I haven't been here for quite some time.
I haven't either, honestly. It
Yeah.
was one of the places that kind of got, well, they say it got bad during like the lockdowns and all that because of like all the drug use and whatnot in the area, but I never, you know, by that time I wasn't coming down here, so I never saw it. Hopefully it's back to normal.
Yeah, I would think so at this point.
So I think it's this street. Yep. So we saw a guy one time standing right outside here, and like we thought he was homeless because he had, you know, his shoes were all wore out, and like he looked really raggedy. So we tried to give him some money, and he goes, "Oh no, I'm okay. This is my house. I live right here." So sometimes it's hard to tell the super wealthy from the homeless. So we are at Washington Square Park, standing right in front of the arches, and you can see once again George Washington, bigger than life-size statues of Washington on both sides of the arch. Washington Square Park, named after George Washington. So again, we're back to the George Washington connections. You know, in that place we went, Francis Tavern, there was a piece on the walls that said he kind of really was like America's first saint. You know, not like a canonized by the Catholic Church saint, but a saint in the sense of it said that, you know, like in the colonial days, like right after the Revolutionary War, everybody here had pictures of them hanging, pictures of him hanging in their house.
Yeah.
You know, like
it's kind of like with Lincoln when
Yes.
Lincoln was president.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other interesting thing about this place, they say there's something, this number may be wrong, so you might want to look this up yourself, but it is some ungodly number of corpses, something like 20,000
Yeah,
bodies
15,000, 20,000, yeah.
buried
Due
up under
to
the park.
cholera and influenza, I think,
Yeah.
and that. But it's like, you know, I always think when people, like, I guess it's no different than some people sometimes have lunches in, you know, big, beautiful cemeteries. So,
Yep.
But it's like when you're here, you know, having lunch.
You know, and if it comes, I mean, really, it comes down to there's probably not a square inch of land on Manhattan, the island of Manhattan, where
True.
somebody hasn't died at any
True.
given time.
Yeah.
And even one of the last things I remember is like not too long before we left here, I remember they were digging up the streets, doing some road work, and they came across
Edison,
another crypt, like right in the middle of the street.
Yeah, I remember
with
that too.
coffins and stuff.
Yeah.
So we are standing at the corner of Washington Square Park right now, and here's the thing. I'm not sure which of these buildings because I've heard people say two different things. You know, that's one of the things about doing history tours. You know, wherever it is, New York, New Orleans, Salem, a lot of times you find that they make up a lot of stuff just to make the tour more exciting. So if you research, you know, one of the things about this area is all of these really prominent, famous authors lived around here, like H.P. Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, and Aleister Crowley. Crowley lived in this area, used to live right across the street from the park. So if you research the address where he lived when he was here, you would get this building right here directly across the street. But if you do the tours, they tell you it was this building right here on the other side, which you can't really see very much of right now because it has all the mesh and netting and everything else on top of it. But Aleister Crowley lived in one of these two buildings across the street from each other when he lived in New York. Hated New York.
I didn't realize he wasn't a fan of it.
Oh no, he hated it. He said it was one of the worst places he'd ever been. So we are standing in front of the Stonewall Inn, which is probably the single most famous gay bar in the whole city.
The most historical too.
Yeah, if
I
not
would
the
say,
country.
in the,
Yeah.
within the U.S.
So I'm going to read something to you real quick. This is just from Wikipedia. You know, you can look this up yourself. It's not in any, you know, you can find this information anywhere, but it talks about how this is kind of like ground zero for where the whole Pride movement kicked off, where everything started. And it says it kind of started it in, what year was it? 1969. This was the site of the Stonewall riots, which is widely considered to be the single most important event leading to the gay liberation movement and the modern fight for LGBT rights in the United States. And that all kicked off right here.
Right
You
here.
can even see, if you come in June of 2024, June 28th of 2024, you know, this is a historic national landmark now. So they're actually putting in a visitor center, and they're going to have a National Monument Visitor Center if you come here starting in June of next year. But also directly across the street is the park with those kind of iconic, the white statues.
Yeah, the white statues, the
that
flags, and that.
commemorate it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, in the city, like if you're gonna pass a bar and you see this,
Yeah.
that makes you want to go in
Pretty
there.
inviting.
It's like you had me at string line.